What's up, everybody? It is Thursday. It's time to talk thinking on paper. My name is Jeremy Gilbertson. Along with me every week is my esteemed co-host, Mr. Mark Fielding. Mark, how goes it in the French Alps, my friend?
Esteemed, thank you. I'm always shocked when I'm called esteemed. I'm really well. It's been a good week, and since we're two writers on Web3, I've signed up to a writing challenge this week you'll like to know. So I'm going to be using mirror.xyz, and for 30 days, we'll see how much I actually achieve of this, but one post, one NFT per day for the next 30 days. So I'm going to reuse some old LinkedIn and Twitter posts, write some new stuff, and every day release an NFT. The goal is to try 30 NFTs, 30 days. Can I make 30 books?
I love it. I've always loved 30-day challenges. I've done a bunch of them. One I did years ago was this minimalist challenge, where every day I had to give away one thing, whether a material thing, whether it was to a friend, to Goodwill, to sell it. I had to get it out of my ecosystem, especially if it was something that was just clutter, right? Day 2, I'd give away 2. Day 3, I gave away 3, and so on. And by the end of the 30 days, I would have given away like upwards of 400 things if you look at it, but they could be small, but the challenges always really interest me. So I'm going to follow that with diligence on my side and check out what you're doing.
Yeah, I like that idea as well, to minimalize things. Have we lost our guest? I can't see.
So I'm trying a new little piece of production tech today. I'm kind of holding him behind the curtain until we can introduce him. So Mark, without further ado, why don't you do that, and we'll bring him on board.
Well, yeah, Corrales, thank you for joining us. I think a lot of our listeners are familiar with him. I first met him through LinkedIn Web3. Last year I attended his human marketing course on inevitable, and that kind of for a few hours I just heard him speaking about human marketing, human blockchain. It really resonated with me, which is why I've wanted to have him on here, because I thought you'd get on with him really well. Since then, I'll let him introduce himself, but I just want to read one of his recent posts just to give everybody an idea of how he's thinking and how kind of he fits thinking on paper really well. So, quote, "Without culture and human connectivity as Web3's primary drivers, there is nothing," and I like this, "but cold technology bereft of meaningful progress. Blockchain itself is an essential component of emotional and spiritual human development, acting more as a cultural vessel for connectivity and less as a high-speed network to transact data." And so, welcome, Corrales. I guess
Thank you, Mark.
question is, what is the human blockchain?
Yeah, well, thank you for that awesome intro. And I think you kind of described it, but, I mean, in simple terms, to me, human blockchain is the idea of us, all of us, are essentially a blockchain. And that sounds a little weird, I think, to a lot of people, but the more you think about it, this space, as everyone will attest, is abstract. I mean, blockchain, if you just go around asking people what's blockchain, you will get so many answers, your head will spin. Most of them are tech. You'll get tech explanations, the typical decentralized ledger. But, I've been in the space, since 2017, and none of that has ever made sense to me. Even though there's a sort of blockchain is this, and crypto, I think in general, is this sort of like, you get it or you don't. And and over the years, I've realized this is really the big problem with adoption. And so there's all kinds of, obviously, that's not new talk. I mean, there's a lot of people talking about how to solve that, but it's almost always a tech solution, like UX is going to do it, which UX is also I think a lot of people misunderstand that too to mean interface design, but really UX is getting into the human side of how people use things. And that's really where we get into the human blockchain concept, which is obviously a metaphor. And that's, I think that's when I really started to understand how powerful, just certain like language, just especially metaphor. So I started playing around with these ideas like, human marketing, human blockchain, human this, human that. And, it was a lot of snickers at first. And a lot of people thought, what, this is just, I would get a lot of comments back, but a lot.
That's when you know you're onto something, Corrales. That's when you know you got something
right.
good.
But people started writing me like in the DMs and being like, what is this thing? And I would be like, I don't know. I'm just literally putting it out there because it feels powerful. It feels, and I know I just want to see how it sticks. And that's how the human marketing class came up. But there were other things like human economics that I started to play around with. And that, I think that really helps really get to the heart and soul of NFTs, and not just the NFT itself, but specifically between the artist and the buyer, which I think is really fascinating. Like a lot of people don't think about that connection. They think about the art, I buy the art and I've got this NFT and I vibe with it and all that stuff, community building. But not many people talk about the artist creating it and that connection, which in Web3 is very unique, as opposed to in Web 2, where a digital artist, you typically don't interface with that artist. And in Web 3, there's a lot, in NFTs, there's a lot of this, utility that gets built into, like, you can talk to the artist, or, that you could do all kinds of things with that utility. But I guess the point is there are these now opportunities to connect directly with the artist and passing on that knowledge, and not just the art, passing on the art, but a lot of it gets into deeper blockchain concepts like composability, where you see a lot of like pixelated art, and this looks, obviously some people think, oh, this is very simplistic stuff, it's or stick drawings or things like that, memes. What are these things? What's going on here? Like, why is this considered art, right? High art and all this. Well, in a way it's not. It's the opposite. And a lot of that has to do with the composability, where someone can take it, build on top of it, the whole Lego block kind of thing, and create something new. And this keeps going. And that's how memes essentially get created. But the more, I think the deeper, even going deeper, is we see these things attaching to economic systems, which, getting into crypto. And that's really where I think a lot of exciting things are happening, that, maybe a lot of it was started in the meme tech stock movement, with kind of like right at the beginning of NFT explosion in 2021, where you had like, a lot of the, what was it, GameStop, and then all of a sudden you have Doge, kind of in that area too. Suddenly there's this Doge meme that's out there in the, internet, and all of a sudden it gets attached to a coin. And it was kind of a joke, like, half joking, half whatever. But I guess whatever the case is, whatever these stories are, what's happening is pretty amazing to me, because you're talking about the connection between art, language, emotion, and community that's being represented through things like memes or composable artwork, and then attaching onto economic systems, which then, of course, can represent how we deal with money. How do we spend it? So I don't think there's a lot of awareness around that specifically. And that's kind of where I kind of wanted to come in and say, human blockchain, what if we can attach meaning and purpose and vision, then we can guide these things in our own decentralized ways, whatever that our stories we want we need to essentially map our humanity onto the blockchain, onto these systems, and essentially personify the tech.
I love it. Let's go down that thread a little bit. So first of all, Dixie Gilbert, what is happening? Your ears must have been burning. We were talking about you in the pre-pro, so good to see you in the chat.
I love Dixie.
And yeah, there we go. Human blockchain for sure. So speaking of the human blockchain, in just that idea and that concept, so humanity, to me, kind of in general, if we go like super high level, we have hierarchical systems and we have emergent systems, right? Emergent systems are like things in nature, like, you know, people have referenced mycelial networks, right, that live under the forest floor, that are these emergent things that connect the world of the forest, right? And then we have hierarchical systems where seemingly super smart humans decide to, you know, create a new process to put on top of nature to try and change nature, right? Not to get too hippie in the woods, even though I'm not wearing shoes right now.
Nor am I.
Right. I'm not either.
but let's talk about the balance between those two systems and how the use of tech, not just for tech's sake, but to enhance humanity. How do those two systems interact?
Yeah, that's a brilliant question, and I think it's actually pertinent when we're sitting here speaking through, you know, this three-way tech interface, and none of us are wearing shoes. Now I mean, honestly, I think this is all connected. You know, the connection to nature has to be understood. If Web3 is going to mean anything, it has to have a full circle connection into the earth and into what we do and to move forward. Like, and you know, like one example obviously is to solve big problems like, you know, climate change and all this kind of thing. These have been talked about in Web3 forever, since that's one of the big, in certain circles anyway. I mean, crypto is very, you know, diverse. So there's a lot of like fossil fuel people versus the hippies who want to, you know, want a better, you know, a better earth in that regard. Oops, I don't know if we lost.
No, you're still there. Just a production technique. We're highlighting you right now.
Okay. No, so I think that we have to understand this connection to the earth, and in a way that makes sense to how we go about our business, just like we're doing in our work from home environments. With the pandemic showed us that we can kind of have it both ways. You know, we can be in our you know, bare feet and talking serious business. So, you know, I think that you start to get into that territory of humanity in a more holistic way, that's attached to tech. And with Web3, I think there's so much to explore there with, you know, and now we have the metaverse and all this, and now, you know, AI and et cetera. But I think that we are headed towards, you know, a more holistic understanding of the tech versus the human with nature involved as well.
It's almost like there's a movement of grounding, which is essentially grounding the human experience to nature without shoes. There's a lot of barefoot walking in the grass, kind of reconnecting, grounding the human condition. It's almost like you're describing kind of grounding the tech that's built onto the human condition to nature as well. And it's something I think that as the years pass and more people suffer from the negative aspects of technology and increasingly the negative aspects of Web3, NFT, blockchain, having that grounding mechanisms in place is more holistic, but it's healthier.
So speak, just to interject really quickly on the grounding thing, because this principle is really important to me, because people always ask me more in depth, okay, whatever, you go walk in the woods and you barefoot in the dirt, whatever, you know what, but there is something to it, right? So there's, to give it a little dose of science here real quick. So there's something called the Schumann resonance. Okay. It's in the ionosphere, which is in the middle atmosphere, I think. And it's an electrical charge that actually is a frequency. I think it's like 7 hertz or something, really low frequency because of all the electrical systems in the ionosphere, right? So it actually charges the planet with a frequency of, 7 point something, right? So here's where it gets interesting. When you get back to nature, you can almost get attuned to that frequency. Your brain has brain waves, right? 4 different types of brain waves, alpha, theta, gamma, delta, different brain waves do different things. The one brain wave that gets you thinking and more connected to nature closely matches that of the Schumann resonance. So anyway, a little science, a little fact in there to ingest all the hippie chat we're talking about, but I love it. I love it.
I think, but even if people who would say that it has no basis in science or it's a hippie conversation, nobody can deny the fact that when you go in nature, you feel better, you feel recharged, you feel energized, you feel more creative, whether that's coming from 7.5 hertz or if that's coming from something else, it's real. So
right, and that's where now the connection, the importance of storytelling comes into play with a lot of this, talking about because we at the end of the day we are talking about Web3 education, but my view is that education is downstream from purpose and emotion and vision and meaning. So the education has to be infused with a lot of that emotional power from an individual level in order for that education to stick and then get into communities to to extend it and turn it into realities. So I think it is really important to understand the cycle of things with regards to nature and our what is our purpose for being here? What is our purpose for being here, and what is our goal for now, the present, and the future? And then we have this connection to the past, and that's where I think it's really powerful to talk about blockchain in terms of past, present, future, because what blockchain is at a very fundamental level is what I would call in cultural terms it's a heritage system where heritage is grounded in the past and things that you celebrate or respect and continue, whereas culture is more of like that includes that heritage, but then can move it into new, evolve it basically. But heritage is a fairly fixed concept, and that's the power of heritage. But you need heritage and culture to create, the past and future, things that are connected to the past. And blockchain, when you think about it, you're talking about immutable, blocks that have a history. And not only that, they are connected. And that's the really important part, to understand this connection to human blockchain, because we have to understand the connections that we have to each other, but not just like random connections. They have to be rooted in a past. And that's where the heritage comes in, that our value systems, that sure, values change and evolve, but we are rooted in things that are heritage, where our upbringing, where our environments are essentially our heritage. And so there's a lot of definitions of that, but it's always a grounding. So to me, like, you have to have a grounded understanding of where you came from, where you're at, so that you can anchor that and then go out into space and and explore. But there's always there has to be a grounding, or you're just going to be floating around, not it just doesn't have any meaning. And I think a lot of people feel that way right now, that they're floating around, just bouncing around in the world, going, oh, here's another tech movement, oh, now I'm supposed to do, what's this new crypto thing? Oh, okay, so where do I go learn this stuff? This is my problem with a lot of Web3 education. Who's the expert on that? Oh, you could go to so and so, take his class. Okay, nothing wrong with that, but what I've noticed is a lot of people just kind of look to other people to go and define it for them. Then they go and spew it out to their people. And honestly, that I don't think that's really what Web3 should be about. I think it has to come from our own power, our own lived experiences. Really.
So that goes back to emergent versus hierarchical. We can't force this top down, right? But if in order for it to emerge bottom up, like culture, like heritage, as it comes up and gets applied in really interesting new ways, it can't be forced. So the idea of like, why isn't this stuff happening so fast? Well, maybe because it needs to live in this emergent bubble instead of this hierarchical thing, right?
I love that it's slow, it's messy. That's culture. That's when you start to apply human things that mean something. Web3 looks fantastic. All this talk of like, how do we make it more efficient? Well, you know what? It's not efficient because Web2 already has the efficiencies built in. We didn't need the blockchain, frankly. So what is the blockchain for? That's why I started calling it blockchain was a cultural vessel versus a node system that you just, put a bunch of nodes on and you can have a speed highway. But what happens when you have a highway system running through a city? People speed through and they don't stop and go shopping at the local shops. So we already know that's a problem in the real world, So why do you want to recreate that in the virtual world? All that speed highway, right?
Not only do they not go to the shops, but the shops suffer because the people aren't stopping. So it's cyclical. On that then, so how do you vet your sources? How do you decide where to get your education? How do you decide this is good, this is bad, I'm going to choose to read this, I'm going to choose to not read that? Do you have a system? Do you have trusted sources? How do you think about it?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I think that's what everyone asks, how to navigate the space and what should they read? I mean, there are a few sources that I've, like a lot of people, I went to YouTube and things like that. But really it was, I mean, there was a few key, I would say like, there's a few key places that I would go to. I think Andreessen Horowitz's like crypto vault, I think, or crypto canon, they call it, and they have an NFT canon. That's actually a pretty fantastic. It's just literally just a list of like hundred, like I don't know how many dozens of, not hundreds of links, but these are very deep philosophical learnings on crypto that kind of go back. A lot of them go back to like the 2018 era, which I feel like there was in 2018, there was a lot of new understanding of what we were about to head into. So I kind of like those around 2017, 2018 videos. There's some really good ones. But aside from that, I mean, my primary thing has been myself, and understanding that's where the mission, vision, values come in, where you have, what is your purpose in life, and what do you really want to do with your own lived experiences, not what crypto says or Web3 has available. Those are good to know. I think it's important to know like the capabilities, but that shouldn't be defining what you want to do. What do you ultimately want to affect change? And then you sort of build backwards. How do I do it?
Corrales, great. Yeah. Sorry to jump on you there.
No,
I wanted to highlight a really, really important point in this, in that a lot of people go out and look for the easy button of where I can push a button and basically get all of this stuff crammed into my brain in a way that'll generate $1 billion idea. Like, where's the button? Sure. Let's find the button. But what you hit, you said yourself, right? Not in an egotistical way, like you know everything there is to know. But what we have to do, especially as writers, what we have to do is we have to see what's happening out there, and then we have to process it. We have to, I call it synthesis, right? Where all these inputs come in your brain. The really good way to synthesize something is to write about it, mashing your perspective, your experience, your first principles with new tech, and then really cool stuff comes out in that way. Is that the same for you?
Yeah. Like, yeah, it's very similar. I mean, it's that writers look at life and how to, it's a combination of your audience. When you're building your business, especially, you have to think about your audience all the time. So you don't have a choice. And but this is when I think the power of storytelling comes in, because you start to understand that, I used to think actually, well, that focus on the audience, that gets away from my own vision, right? Like if I'm just sitting there doing what they want, but then now I understand it a lot deeper, that, it's that classic, narrative, the hero guide thing, where you become the guide and you make them the hero of their story. And that's really, I think, if you had to boil it down, that's what I think. How do you reach, mass adoption in Web3? It's that model. You have to do it. You don't have a choice. I don't think people realize this. There is no other choice, but people are going to do what they're going to do. The question is, what stories do you want them to tell out there?
Yeah, absolutely. And on the story side too, Kamani, who's in the chat, brilliant storyteller, producer. I met him on a call that I participate on with a DAO project. And you're spot on, Kamani. Language is a blockchain. That's a really interesting thought, right? This collection of letters that are used to compose words, that are used to compose sentences, paragraphs, stories, chapters. Really cool thought there. I love it.
Used to compose culture. Language is culture. Culture is.
Yeah. I mean, I really look at blockchain as the beginnings. I would say somewhere around 200,000 years ago, we have the emergence of mimetic culture, and that's really where this understanding of, this group over here hums. Well, what is humming? Well, what does humming do for us? Oh, humming helps, ward off beasts. So I'm going to go with these guys. They're hummers.
I don't like beasts either. Yeah, let's get it.
Right?
Yeah.
I don't want to die. So I'm going to go hum with these people. Now they've passed on. Humming didn't exist before other people saw someone do it. Maybe someone started humming first, and then, we don't know that. But the point is, that's that mimetic kind of building blocks. And really, that's kind of what blockchain is about, where you have a genesis block, you have a block 0, and that sort of kicks off, and it will define the other blocks. That's not to say you can't change the trajectory, but it's just like a chapter in a book. Like something happens, you go to the next chapter, and you build, and maybe mistakes happen in chapter 1 through 3, but in chapters 4 through 6, you start to fix those things. And that's really, that's an MVP model. We can talk, that's how building works. You make mistakes, but you are never, I like the immutability of blockchain, because it's just like in life. You can't erase what you've done. And that's not the point. You want to remember that history and the mistakes, but in a way that, you learn from them, hopefully. And with blockchain, we literally have a technology that, in theory anyway, is immutable. And I think that's a really powerful and very empowering thing that we've just never had as a species, to say we have a public record of this. Is incredible. And that, again, this is not to say that it's an easy thing to say, because all these things are based on storytelling. Like, I can present you with facts, but that story can be spun millions of different ways of what that fact is, right? So it's not like you can just point to it and be like, see, here's what happened in, on block X. See, everyone agrees. I mean, no, not everyone's going to agree, but just the fact that we can now do that literally with a technology is pretty amazing to me.
Yeah, and I tend to repeat those mistakes that are immutable through time, but we're prone to false memory syndrome, aren't we? We're prone to creating stories that didn't exist and remembering the past in often quite different ways to actually what happened. And this immutability removes that that falsehood. I'm aware of time on this, and I know that we know how you think, or how you think a little bit about blockchain and Web3 and the human aspect of it. How are you using that today? So let's talk about Brand New Voices and how that philosophy and how you're thinking, what you're doing with it on a practical day-to-day level, because it sounds very interesting, this project you're working on.
Yeah, so there's a couple things. So the human marketing class that you mentioned, Mark. So I'm going to be putting that onto into a more a home on my website. So that will become a course there, which I'll probably have a self-guided thing, and then probably roll that into some sort of cohort group, maybe possibly coaching and consulting around that idea of human marketing. And so that's kind of what Brand New Voices will represent, the kind of storytelling. It's going to be mostly a storytelling angle, of helping people tell their stories and using this human marketing system to do that. And so the objective really is quite simple. It's really to help people tell, from founder stories to pitch decks and things like that, and consulting around how they can take a more human approach to marketing and attach their, the important part I want to concentrate on is lived experiences, because I feel like that's the biggest pain point that I've encountered with and talked to people about, is that they don't understand how their past is relevant to this future in Web3. They sort of like dismiss it even and say, people don't even talk about it. Literally, they just talk about what they can do with, most people want to know, how do I want to learn all this stuff so that I can go and, find opportunities and learn all these things. But the truth is, like, you have to go with what you know and really dig deep. So a lot of it is going to be based actually on the yourself and leveling up into understanding how to tell your story. So this gets into personal narrative and content creation, and then also applying that to this concept I call the conversation roadmap, which is kind of like this: having a guided conversation to your objectives that lead into mission, vision, values in a company kind of organizational way, is a very natural way to talk about how to basically build anything in that respect. So you're starting from a place of conversational and a lot of questioning, like what are your values? What do they mean to you? If your values are that you are, you like honesty, what does honesty mean to you? Not what you read. Yes, we have baseline definitions, but what do you want it to do? What, in your view? And so that's when you get into that uniqueness of brand, where you're saying, my version of honesty is rooted in a definition, but in ours, we do this special thing. And that's where, buyers and consumers start to pay attention and go, that's different. That's a thing that I want to do too. Right.
Yeah, it takes a couple of layers to unpack that and ask really challenging questions, and not being satisfied with a canned response and just going down and down and down. I think it's great. And one other thing I wanted to touch on too, Dixie and I talked about this with the whole Ripple thing and what she's doing with Web3 talent over there, is that, Web3 is relatively new, right? And it's also like a confluence of technology coming together, right? You have it. I don't see it as just blockchain. I see it as blockchain. I see it as game engines. I see it as CG models turned into animation. I see, all of these methods kind of coming together. But pointing to the past is really important, because, someone would ask any one of us, "Oh, how long have you been in Web3?" And we might say like 18 months, 2 years or whatever, right? But you have to remember, everything that I've done in the past, everything you've done in the past, Mark, everything you've done in the past has built this collective understanding of how the world works, right? In really interesting ways. And now we apply it to tech. We apply it to a new idea. And that's the challenge, because like, oh, where, Web3 talent, where is everybody? And it's kind of like, well, we're here. We just
Right.
need to realign our messaging and our
There you go.
superpowers, right?
There you go. You nailed it, Jim. That's exactly it. Like, I want people to say, how long have you been in Web3? What year do you want me to start? When I was 10? Or maybe when I was 15, but maybe when I was 2. Really, that's really because the more we understand it as a place of empowerment, the better that we're going to apply the tech. So that's simple. So all of this talk, this is why I kind of dislike a lot of the financialization of like where these arguments about like Bitcoin especially are always based on this tokenomics thing about how superior it's going to be versus fiat. And sure, I think we all can agree there's a sense of superiority, but that's not that can't be the meaning behind it. And I think what it's going to take I think what it's ultimately going to take for people to stop doing that is this is what it gets into my other thing, which is this thing called Culture 3 Fund, which is this idea of using and understanding the underpinnings of culture and heritage and storytelling to really apply meaning onto tech, but especially in Web3, and recast tokenomics itself, because that's the only way we're going to stop thinking in market terms and thinking in terms of like, if this is up in the market, that's valuable. If it's down, it's not valuable. That's just junk. I mean, there's no other way to put it. We cannot continue doing this thing where it's like up and down, this very basic metrics of value.
The same thing applies with the same thing with NFTs, where if it sells out, it's useful, it's valuable. If it doesn't sell out, it's worthless. And we have to stop that narrative as well.
So Corrales, on culture, the Culture 3 Fund, and kind of, I use the word superpowers a lot, but so like, of your superpowers being applied to using this technology to help certain groups of people kind of push through some boundaries, right? That's kind of the idea. Like, not that it's a particular heritage or maybe it's a particular demographic, but what are some examples of you leaning into using this tech to help someone break through something they haven't been able to before?
That's a great question. I think generally, universally, the idea behind probably human blockchain, I would say this notion is universal. Like, it doesn't matter where you're from. It's a sort of reframing of your place in this continuum and this future. And I think that's I think that's the biggest play you can make, when you can get people to understand that they are in the driver's seat versus they're just following along, which is what a lot of people did in Web 2. And frankly, most of the web's history is about that. And the engineers build stuff, pass down, including language. So this came up with somebody, a friend of mine in Cuba, where they, Amira, she has a lot of issues. Like, if she visits a website, she'll get access denied, because in Cuba there's a lot of places they can't go on the web. And it's pretty shocking. I mean, she'll send me screenshots and I'm just like, oh my God, like, her reality is completely different than what folks in the US and, in Europe and other parts of the world experience. But even the language behind that, when you see a message that says access denied, this is a horrible, these are the things that play on people's, the use of language to basically oppress people. And tech has been doing this forever. And that's the whole problem, is it comes from the place of technologists who don't even think about this stuff. They think of it as systems level, computer level, machine level, but then it gets mixed into the culture. So then we start talking in terms like that. And that's what I mean. This is the understanding that we have to stop praising the technology sector just because it's technology alone. And we have to map our own lived experiences and our humanity onto that tech and to go, that's valid. This is not a joke. This is not a squishy thing. This is how we need to move. This is how we're going to solve big problems in the world with this stuff. Right. So it's a lot of reframing. I mean, if it comes down to it.
100%. Yeah. So it'd be good just through your lens and your experiences. What projects have you seen, maybe highlight a couple that you think are doing it right related to humanity meets blockchain?
You mean projects that are in existence right now, like out there?
Yeah. Or even in ideation or yeah.
I mean, there's a lot I'm not aware of. I mean, frankly, it's like there's so many. We're in a decentralized a thing, but I mean, on the NFT side, I think one of the biggest things happening in NFTs that is on the fringes, which is where I think all the big stuff is. But so it's not like a lot of people it's going to be like, oh wow, because most people just don't think of it. But like CC0, I think is a major thing that is going to become more and more important because of the way that it's able to extend across borders and not worry about all of the typical IP trappings that are, frankly, a lot of country, these are border specific stuff that I think prevents, like if you take a place like a continent like Africa.
This is real quick. This is referring to Creative Commons license, right?
Right, Creative Commons license.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So a lot of the problems throughout Africa is that there's so many countries, but there's a lot of borders that even within that continent. So when you think about it, like we need to start breaking down those borders, not building up more. And a lot of the IP is simply reinforcing that stuff. So CC0, really is about spreading of culture. So I think you see that in projects like, the MFers and certain, the toads, crypto toads, and, certain projects that are really about the spirit of creativity versus all of the alpha in that's typical in NFTs. So I'm not saying those don't exist in those communities, but I think they're examples of where we're headed with NFTs. And I mean, you could probably call the metaverse is probably headed there too, because there's a lot of borderless activity going on in the metaverse.
Yeah, real quick comment. I'm noticing Carlos chiming in a couple of times. The fact that robust censorship resistance is a value in many projects, right? In that regard, interesting thought. Like, what do you think about that?
That censorship resistance is a good, like as a positive value, or I'm not sure what
is it.
It's a positive value.
Mm-hmm.
Censorship resistance to the censorship.
Yep.
Right.
Meaning more openness, more reduction of limitation,
yes,
and who can see what and when and why and how.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's public blockchain, but I think it's important to understand what I like to point out to people is when we say blockchain, most people don't distinguish between private and public. And there's a huge difference. I mean, if Bank of America is building blockchains, these are not generally going to be public blockchains. So a lot of the ideals of blockchain are not in the private blockchains. It's not that they're not useful, but there's a lot that we have. There's a lot of education that has to come with blockchain. Even blockchain, I think, is again, and that's where I think, because it's so complicated, it's so technical, I don't expect people to just sort this out. Honestly, what has helped me, that's how I came up with a lot of this, applying our personifying the tech because it makes more sense. When I say if I'm blockchain, what do I want to do? How do I want to be represented? Do I want to be, stuffed into a corner, or do I want to be free? Most people are going to say, I would like to be free. That's public blockchain, right? So,
but then you have someone wrestling blockchain, someone outside of blockchain wrestling blockchain, trying to say, hey, blockchain, I need you to come over in my corner because I want to do this monetization thing, and don't worry about what they're doing. And that's just the economics of society and all of that stuff.
Yeah, but we have to think, right? Yeah. But we have to think about those choices, just like you do with people. If someone comes up to me and says, "Hey, man, I got this great idea, let's talk. We're going to do it in private, though. We don't want people to find out." Now, you're gonna, you as a person, you're gonna approach that differently. You're gonna think, is that good for me? Does that fit with my values? And that's where that importance of that value system applied to the tech. Hopefully, we make better choices because of that. And when we understand it from that, we're mapped onto that tech, then maybe in some cases the private chain is fine. But I think there's a lot going on in this space that is very toxic and ugly, and it's going to come back. It always does. And it's happening with AI, certainly. I think this is really scary when you get into AI.
Well, the facilitation too between public and private, then we can kind of get down the path of this self-sovereign identity. How do I manage my identity and personas and my anonymity in certain cases, my openness in other cases, but having people have the choice to kind of do that is I think we can go down 9 different rabbit holes where we're headed. I'm trying to be mindful of time too. I know we're getting pretty close. Mark, where's your head? How are you feeling?
I'm still thinking about the how long I've been working in Web3 and then mapping my life onto those. I like how the way you talk about Web3, obviously not just about blockchain, but about game engines and crypto, and how my journey started with crypto when I had my first bank account. I was 16 and I got charged a ridiculous overdraft fee. And my experience with Web3 gaming started when I was like playing Nintendo like 30 years ago.
Right.
And so kind of mapping that onto it.
Exactly.
But I'm just staying quiet on private and public blockchains and AI because I'm wary of time, and that's just a hole that I'm quite angry about private blockchains and the way that I think it kind of corresponds to NDAs and like Corrales mentioned, kind of let's do this in private behind this wall. And I think that's representative of much of Web3 with projects in, like, I think stealth mode is one of the most poisonous words in Web3. I think it's such a terrible idea. Like the word is just horrible. I think I think that move, and I think it is like private blockchains as the big banks, as the big tech companies, as the stalwarts of Web2 make their moves, they're choosing and building private blockchains for obvious reasons that you mentioned, Jeremy, about how finance works in society. And I don't know, like a lot to think about. Can I just ask one question though? Because when I did the human marketing class, Corrales mentioned a book that changed my life, and it changed how I think about writing, and it changed how I think about analogy, and it was called The Science of Storytelling, and I didn't know about the book until he mentioned it. Are there any other books that you're reading that I should read about analogy and Web3 and writing at the moment?
That one is a real game changer.
Yes.
Let's see. Of the ones that I listen, I do a combination of like audio books and my Kindle. There's this one called, this one I'm reading called Wired for Story. And it's really a writer's book about how, I think she's a manuscript person, but it's about storytelling. But the deeper I get into storytelling, the more I realize how important it really is to Web3 to understand like how to tell these very abstract concepts in ways that mean something to people. I mean, it's really important. And I think I would even argue it's one of the most important ideas right now, simply because there's not a lot of practical application to this stuff right now, widely, right? There's not, companies aren't just, unlike AI, where you see it just rapidly eating up the landscape of like, oh, we're going to build it into, Microsoft Word now. And now your favorite app has AI. This is not happening with blockchain. This is not happening even in NFTs. There's all this talk of the promise of it, but the reality is the tech is slow. And I think it's important to understand from a storyteller's perspective that there's a reason for that. There's a good reason for it. It's not that it's behind the 8 ball. It's that you're talking about things that are very important to slow down, and say what does this mean if we build it in. So I think these storytelling books, building a story brand by Donald Miller, it's always a good one. So a lot of these are obviously these are not Web3 typical. These are not Web3 books I'm reading, but
foundational principles completely applicable to what's happening right now.
Yeah, it really is. It's really critical. Like I think with the combination of like some very fundamental understandings of blockchain composability and interoperability and things like that, those are very important, I think, concepts. So I think if you learn those core things and then start to understand how, I don't think you need a lot of them, honestly. I think people overcomplicate this whole, like, they've got to go learn smart contracts now. Well, I've been on spaces with Kevin Rose, and he's talking about he can't even keep up with the rate of acceleration. I mean, this is Kevin Rose, right? Like, he's like, we're talking about cycles that I thought were 6 months going down to 3 months. And now I don't even know if it's that. That's how fast. So I'm not saying smart contracts are worthless. Obviously, they're very important, but a lot of people just spend crazy amounts of time trying to understand all these new things, following news after news after news of new launches, new things happening. And I just think it's a real hamster wheel, frankly.
Couple of great comments, just echoing the importance of storytelling. Steve Brett and Kamani again talking about how story is super important, but also like Kamani, really interesting there, how it lets us do things with community that we haven't been able to do before, that enable this, here we go, bi-directional value exchange between participants, between one another, between people internal and external to the community, but also keep track of it, right? So a little comment on stealth mode too. So stealth mode, people stay stealth because they're worried someone else is going to take advantage of their idea that they're trying to develop in general, right? Couldn't blockchain actually hold who owns that idea primarily and who adds to that idea over time and make it very transparent? So it could be in and of itself the own solution to its own problem, right?
Yeah, that's what we said last week, wasn't it? Tech solving tech's problems.
Exactly right. Well, I think, hey guys, I think we're a little over on time. Corrales, we could chat for another hour and a half, I'm sure. About all this stuff, and I look forward to some follow-ups. Mark, any final thoughts that we want to wrap?
It's been a great conversation. I just think that there was another comment from Carlos, and I think that I imagine Corrales can relate with this. There's a lot of individuals value order over liberty, and that's narrative. And I think that is incredibly pertinent, incredibly powerful, and perhaps the education needs to be focused there somewhere. And maybe this is how we do it.
Yeah,
that's my closing thought.
Awesome. Corrales, such a pleasure chatting with you. I look forward to connecting again some point very soon. Mark, always a pleasure. Everyone checking the show out, really appreciate you guys watching us. Continue feeding us with thoughts and ideas in the chat. We do have a new website that Mr. Fielding has thoughtfully put together, Thinking on Paper .xyz, and I'm going to say it like he does.
XYZ.
XYZ. Check it out. All the old episodes are up there. If you missed one, jump on it. Stay tuned for more fun from us.
Also, Jeremy, like I'll do the show notes on YouTube. So all of the books, all the references, all the companies, everything we've mentioned, we'll put in the show notes on YouTube as well, so you can access those.
Amazing. Nice. Thanks again, Corrales. Enjoy the rest of your day.
All right. Cheers.
Take care.
Bye.